Guys, this is Dedeene. As I promised, I made my video about why the coronavirus was made in a lab in China. I put a lot of effort in it, so watch till the end. I hope the arguments that I'm going to give can convince you about the truth that is made in a lab and not naturally occurred. I have economic arguments, political arguments. There are even journalists that disappeared when they were covering this subject. So I hope I don't disappear after I put this video online. I hope you guys also stay safe. It's not because the virus was made in the lab. It doesn't mean it can harm you, or it can't harm you, I mean. So stay safe, guys, and enjoy the video.
So, to start the video off, we're going to cover the mainstream media story that all governments want us to believe. So, the mainstream story, I guess you guys heard it, but I'm gonna repeat it for the people who don't, is that in Wuhan, in a wet animal market where a lot of animals are crowded onto each other, a man got infected from a bat that he bought there. Um, and the virus was carried over from the bat to the human, and he was patient zero. But there is evidence that suggests, as you can read in the news article, that the first corona patients that had been tested positive had never been to the Wuhan wet market before. So I think the theory that the media tells us is true is not really a strong one. So I have two other theories that are more reliable than the one they tell you in the media. Um, First, you have to know that there are different types of laboratoria, and there is one only 13 kilometers from the Wuhan wet market where the virus started. And that laboratorium is a biological level 4 laboratoria, the only one in the whole of China, where they conduct research on viruses like SARS and Corona. So it's the only one in the whole of China. So seems like too much of a coincidence to be that close to each other. And it's also known in China that some researchers in laboratoria sell their animals that they have carried out tests on afterwards to wet markets to earn a little bit of extra cash. So the bat theory could be true, but in the media they tell you the virus comes from another mammal. So I would say it's more likely that it comes from the laboratorium. But there is also a second theory, and that is people working in laboratoria, of course, take the necessary precautions to not get sick or infected, but it can always happen. And maybe one of the researchers at the laboratorium walked out of the door and he was infected without knowing it, and he accidentally infected other people. The reason why it would be made in a laboratorium is it's not because China wanted everyone in the world to get sick, but when science people look at the virus, they see it has a lot of mutations, especially HIV mutations, which allow the virus to infect other people much faster than other coronaviruses. And as you can see in the other news articles, most researchers think that it is almost impossible for the virus to mutate naturally on its own in that kind of tempo. So this is also a strong suggestion that it was made in a laboratorium. If you put that together with the questionable origin of the story that the media tells, with the fact that the only laboratorium of level 4 biology in China is only 13 kilometers away from the wet market, then you see some patterns coming together, and I think this is a strong indication that it's a man-made virus. Then of course we have the case of the missing journalist slash lawyer Shen Qiushi, who arrived moments before the lockdown in Wuhan happened, because he wanted to report on the situation in Wuhan and live during the lockdown. But he also raised some questions and raised his voice about the question if the virus came from Mother Nature or it was a man-made virus. And after some days, he got a voice online and he was a spokesperson for other people, their concerns. So with all that, the Chinese government probably had enough of it and they wanted to silence him. So they did what they mostly do and they conducted him. So his mother hasn't heard from him in a couple of weeks. So I think it's safe to assume that he was conducted and or murdered by the Chinese government just to silence him and to stop the facts from spreading. So last but not least, I want to talk about the political and economical effects of this situation. I'm gonna go back a little bit in time, and if you look at the graph, you see that the last 30 years, the US had a building up trade deficit with China. If you're not really into economics, it's basically not good for the United States. They have to build off their deficit so their balance is back to zero or positive. And Trump wanted to do that by imposing import tariffs against China, so they would import less goods from China and sell more goods to China, so the balance would be not as negative as it is today. Of course, China responded to that with their own import tariffs, and so they got caught up in a trade war. So that has been going on for the last couple of years, but I think with the timing, it is certainly beneficial for China, because if you look at this article, you see that only 10 days apart from the first death in China, the first person was infected in the United States. And if you look at another article that is from yesterday or today, you see that the amount of infected people has already is more in the United States than in China, while you would think China is about the same size as the United States, but has 4 times more inhabitants. So you would think that there would be more infections in China, but that isn't the case. And if you look at the absolute numbers, it's only a small difference, but when you take into calculation that the United States has 4 times less inhabitants, you see that there are already 4 times more people infected in the United States, and it's the most infected country in the world. So I think it's also another big coincidence, or what I suggest more, that it's also part of the plan of China, because in China there are so little infections, so I think it's made in the lab and they could prepare their population better than the United States. And countries like Indonesia, which has double the amount of inhabitants as the United States and less access to healthcare, have less infections. Then if we look further, I don't know if you guys know about the new Silk Road that China is building. So they're trying to revitalize the old Silk Road from the Middle Ages. And to do that, they are building ginormous infrastructure projects. As you can see in the video, these are the projects that they're building. And if you look at another map then, with the spread of people infected with the COVID virus, you can really see that there is a concentration on Europe and United States, also China, but per person that really isn't that bad. So you see that most of the countries that lay on the Silk Road are less infected than Europe and the United States, which further strengthens the theory that Europe and the United States are on purposely hit extra hard with coronavirus, and less the areas that China needs to further build their Silk Road to improve their future economic power. And also in the United States, I talked about that there are a lot of people infected. You might think, what does that have to do with economics? Well, if the United States economy slumps a bit and the growth lessens, then their purchasing power parity, which means how much goods they can buy in their own country, but also in other countries. If they produce less, they'll have to import more, and most likely those imports will come from China. So China will see their trade balance go up again, and it's really smart played by the Chinese. But if you look good enough, you can see what their plan is. Then to finish off, I want you guys to remember that's the map with the spreads. And if you look at Africa, there are almost no infections, and certainly not relative to the population. I think that's maybe the most astounding of all, because there are scientists who say it's too hot in Africa for the virus to survive. But when you look at countries in Latin America and Oceania, you see a lot of more infections. So if you then look at the fact that China is investing heavily in Africa, they are building hydro projects, high-speed train roads, extracting coal, extracting gold, extracting steel. They're basically purchasing Africa. And if you combine that with the fact that there are almost no infections in Africa, I think that's also another strong suggestion that China has at least a bit of control over the virus, and it certainly isn't a pandemic or a natural
Alright guys,
disaster.
that was it for the video for today. I hope I convinced you why the coronavirus was made in the lab. Subscribe to my channel, press that like button, and subscribe to my notifications so you get a notification when I upload a new video. The next video will be about why the earth is flat and not round as most people believe. I will also come forward with strong scientific evidence and controversial theories to the next one.